Our speaker tonight is Alex Moshkin, an assistant professor of comparative literature at Koç University in Istanbul. He is joining us at 3 a.m. his time. So we are very, very grateful, Alex, for your going the extra mile to be with us tonight. Alex's book project, Double Diaspora, Russian Culture in Search of Israeli Identity, investigates how Russian-speaking immigrants to Israel created a cultural identity for themselves in sync with Israeli society. And now with that, I would like to hand it off to Alex. Take yourself, there you go.
Thank you so much, Udi, and thank you for inviting me. This is actually the first time for me speaking in the synagogue, so I'm really excited. And I will not be speaking that loudly because I have a toddler son in the other room, so hopefully he does not wake up, but I'm really excited to be here. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, excellent. So let me share screen. Okay, you can see everything, right? Okay, so since the collapse of the USSR, a huge number of Russian-speaking Jews immigrated to Israel. Because Soviet Jews experienced a great deal of discrimination, anti-Semitism, and even imprisonment back in the USSR, the newcomers thought they were coming home. They were certain of their Jewish identity, which was officially inscribed in their Soviet passports. Here you can see the infamous nationality line in the Soviet passport, and here it says Yevgeny, which means in Russian Jewish. So their nationality was both officially inscribed in the Soviet passport, and Soviet neighbors never really let them forget that. So they expected a grand reunion with their Jewish brothers and sisters. Remember the Cold War Soviet Jewry movement slogan, "Let my people go," and the brochures they received from the Jewish agency that assured them that a bright future awaited them in the Middle East. Unfortunately, this grand reunion never happened. What they realized that the triumphant rhetoric of homecoming conceals the fact that Aliyah to Israel is not much different from migration to any other place. Here's a witty comment on that by Nelly Gutina, another Russian immigrant to Israel. So you can read it yourself. So the emigres had to still learn how to navigate a new country and an unfamiliar language into ways through poverty, unemployment, loneliness, and culture shock. And I feel like the tension between this expectation and reality is at the core of the film that we watched today, Golden Voices. The film asks, to what extent were Russian-speaking Jews received a fantasy, and did it live up to their expectations? Instead of giving a definitive answer, this is why the film is interesting, I feel like the film rejects a happily ever after finale of so many works by previous generations. Let's say like different refuseniks, for example, Nathan Shalansky, right? It's like a narrative that goes all along towards, you know, this endpoint of Israel, of migrating to Israel, and this is like the happily ever after, how the narrative ends. But here the film rejects happily ever after in favor of a more complex exploration of the immigrant experience. As the film director Yevgeny Ruman states in an interview, to start a new chapter, a person needs to say goodbye to the past. And this is, I think, the overall message of the film, that migration to any place doesn't mean that life will get better automatically without agency and proactive action. And I would love to talk about that much more with you in the Q&A section, about what do you think the film tries to say about migration in general, through those really flawed characters, right? They're so complex and interesting. I think this is why I was so glued to the film. But let's take maybe a step back and see how much you know about Russian-speaking Jews in Israel. Let's do a poll here on Zoom. How many Russian-speaking Jews do you think immigrated to Israel after 1989? Is it, and here you have a polling question, so please answer. Do you think it's 45,000, 100,000, 500,000, or 1 million? Okay, I'll give you.
We have 65 that participated, 73%.
Huh?
We're gonna close the poll in 10, 9. Take a guess. Take a wild ass guess.
Okay, great. So you all know that it's a lot. Okay, good job. Yes, 1 million. 1 million people is correct. And I think just for scale, to figure out what an insane amount it is, here we have statistics. So it's over 1 million people. And I think to appreciate the scale of this, as Matty Friedman wrote, imagine the United States absorbing in 1 decade roughly all of France and Holland. This is what happened when Russian-speaking Jews came, because in a matter of few years, there were 1 million people, and Russian-speaking Jews were 20% of the country, with a passport, who do not know the language, the culture, and really disoriented. And I feel this in the film really shows that well. Okay, one more question. What do you think was the main difficulty for the immigrants once they arrived in Israel? Let's do another poll. Okay, you clearly watched the film. Okay, great. I think we can stop just because it's so, most of you, exactly. So both the professional downgrading was the main difficulty, but all of the above is right. And let me quickly run through those three things, and then we can start talking about the film. So as you may know, most of you Jews who arrived in Israel were urban and well educated, yet very few of them found jobs that matched their occupational credential. Why? Because, well, they lacked some important skills such as knowledge of computing, Hebrew and English, self-marketing, and some of their jobs were really not a good fit for the Israeli culture and society at the time. For example, dubbing films into Russian. So as a result, their unemployment was 2 or 3 times higher than that of Hebrew-speaking Israelis, and professional downgrading became the story of this community. Engineers who worked as security guard or street sweepers, doctors and scientists who became house cleaners or even sex workers. In the film, we see this in the storyline of Raya and Victor, right? 2 prominent dubbing actors, even friends with Fellini, who are struggling to find and meet in Israel. Apartment shortage is another thing that we've seen in the film. The suddenness and scale of this immigration wave brought a severe housing shortage. In big cities like Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa, rent price tripled in just 1 year. Imagine that. Landlords started charging so much. So the local people were quite angry at the Russian-speaking immigrants, because they're like, okay, well, because of you, now we have to pay rents like so much higher. So the immigrants became, in a sense, a goat. So one solution was to encourage Russian newcomers to settle in Israel's peripheral towns, where rent is subsidized. And the other solution was to share their living space with several generations of family members or with other immigrants. I don't know if you've seen Yana's Friends. It's another excellent Israeli film about the Russian-speaking community, but this is precisely what happened. Both several generations of people living together and with other immigrants. We don't see that so much here, but it is hinted at the very beginning, how like the rent, $500 per month, is so high for especially for the Soviet Jews who come without any money whatsoever. And the last thing is discrimination. And I've shown you the pictures of the Israeli artist, Zoya Cherkassky-Nnadi. I don't know if you know her, but I highly recommend you Google her afterwards. She is one of the main, most well-known Israeli contemporary artists, and she likes to paint this really in-your-face, provocative painters about, and she has different series. This one is about the Russian-speaking community and their immigration to Israel. Here, for example, it says in Hebrew, Russians go back to Russia. And her pictures were in the Israeli Museum for a year and a half. Her solo exhibition was in the Israeli Museum for over a year and a half. I don't know any artist who received such an achievement. So back to discrimination. So this is something that's not really shown directly in the film, but indirectly we see this. So the main source of contention with local Israelis related to the immigrants' Jewish identity. As you may know, in the atheist Soviet Union, expressions of Judaism and Jewishness was highly regulated and banned. As a result, Jewish identity of Soviet Jews grew weaker, became secular, and was emptied of religious and traditional content. So when Russian-speaking Jews immigrated to Israel, the new arrivals did not easily recognize them as Jews. And so this community was sometimes treated with ambivalence and even hostility. So for example, in December, when Soviet Jews wanted to celebrate what they thought was the secular holiday of Novyi, Russian for New Year, things became especially tense. Why? Because it looked conspicuously like Christmas, right? We have like here Santa Claus, we have Christmas tree, but in the Soviet Union, this was the most beloved holiday, both by Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And it was completely devoid of any religious content because there cannot be religious content in the Soviet Union. So many Israelis, especially religious ones, this was a clear sign that, those Russian immigrants are goyim. Another explosive issue related to the consumption of non-kosher products. And this is something that we see very quickly in the film when they're inviting Boris / Baruch for dinner with his wife and kids. They're playing with chaladets, which is like a pork jelly. And the kids are like, ooh, disgusting, what is that? But the film doesn't really draw attention to that. But for the, for whoever knows the culture and society, clear knows that, oh my God, they're inviting people who may or may not be religious. And clearly they do not know the rules of kashrut. So as a secular group, Jews from the USSR used to eating pork. So after immigrating, they opened non-kosher grocery stores throughout the country to preserve their eating habits. Once again, we have two. Here it says basar lavan teri, so flesh, white meat. White meat in Israel is a euphemism for pork. And it says Passover in Bat Yam, we have bread everywhere. Here's another painting by her. And so once again, this heightened this perception of this community as non-Jews by the local population. And the last thing I want to talk about is the experience of Russian-speaking women. So during the 90s, as many scholars have shown, many Russian-speaking women experienced the shock in their encounter with Israeli men who simply saw them as available sex objects, both because of their gender and because of immigrants. Here, the two things are working together. Because of this stereotype that was perpetuated in Israeli media, Russian-speaking women were often approached with sexual offers on the street, in public parks or buses, or even in their workplace. To this day, Israeli media, cinema, and literature are full of images of Russian women as attractive but dangerous foreigners, stressing their sex appeal while emphasizing their threat to local Israeli mores. And I think the film plays with this stereotype a little bit, and I would love to hear what you think. And will actually be really good to talk about gender too, to think about how gender operates differently in the film. For example, how does Victor deal with his experience of Aliyah, and how does Raya does that? And is there a difference? And is this difference somehow related to their gender? So epilogue. So despite these difficulties that I just noted, after 30 years in the country, Russian-speaking Jews have succeeded in integrated and contributing to Israeli society in different areas. Ex-Soviet software engineers responsible for the meteoric rise of high-tech industry, coaches and athletes with Russian accent are winning the lion's share of Israel's gold, silver and bronze medals in the Olympic Games, and writers and artists from the USSR are busy at work shaping Israel's Hebrew language literature, cinema, theater, visual art, and music. So in short, this massive wave of migration profoundly transformed the country, as this recent book by the journalist Lili Galili and politician Roman Bronfman, The Million That Changed the Middle East, attests. The film starts with a dedication to our parents, and in my opinion, it's really important. Made by the director Yevgeny Luman, who immigrated to Israel at a young age. I think he was 7 or 8. So very similar to me. I migrated when I was 12. So the movie is a testament to the older generation, to his parents' generation, both to their difficulties, but also to their perseverance. In fact, the parents of the director actually appeared in the film, not in speaking roles, but you can see them there as background actors. And even the idea to put them as background actors is so important. The movie is ripe for symbolic reading, from Vladimir Lanchaya's job in the background of Soviet film industry, probably as a result of being Jews, or their place at the margins of the Israeli society, this time, because they're immigrants, but also because they're Russian immigrants. Also, we can think about how Vladimir constantly tries to take control over the reality with his camera, literally produce a better version of reality or fantasy, and how it makes him miss out on life, grow distance from his wife, and annoy many people along the way, as we see in the first scene, right? The people who are waiting for him. In fact, every time we have a camera in the movie, it's always self-reflexive. It's always the camera stands in or makes us think about the director, who are also with the camera, but showing us something. So I think there's a different way the director and Vladimir operate with the camera. Vladimir tries to edit reality, to make it so much nicer, better, to freeze the past. But what the director of the film of Golden Voices does, he does not try to produce a fantasy. Quite the opposite. It is a comedy, but it's a really bittersweet comedy. I think you'll agree with me with that. And another metaphor, how Raya is able to find herself and make genuine connections only when she's pretending to be someone else. And the film asks, can she do this in real life too? Perhaps this is the ending of the film where she does. And let's talk about if you want, about the scene in the car when she reveals to her client that she's Margarita, which is so powerful. I feel like she shatters his illusion, just like her illusions are shattered when she tries to when she tries to, go try different life, different, like almost adopt the persona of Margarita, and in the end, her line's like, no, no, no. In any case, all these important metaphors help us understand this wonderful film. In Hebrew, the movie is called Kolot Reka, which translates to background voices. And I think it's a much better title than Golden Voices, because there's more pathos in it. In the movie, the newcomers are no longer placed in the background. They're given a spotlight. And perhaps for the first time, the movie asked them to speak with their own voices and not be dubbing someone else. And now it's a good time to actually move to the Q&A portion of the talk. I'll love to take your questions or just comments. I would love to hear what you think about the film, and anything you want to say, please do. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. This is terrific. So if you can just take yourself off of mute and ask your question, or if you're a little shyer, feel free to put it in the chat and I will bring it up. We'll go ahead. Gittel?
Yeah.
I take it you're on mute though.
There it is.
There we go.
Okay. So I was involved here when the Russian Jews came in the late 70s, early 80s.
Me too.
And I think the experience that they had here was probably not so unlike, and please, perhaps you can stress the, the differences, but I know they all felt that they had to downgrade their positions. They all came as either engineers or doctors, and they had to do much more menial type of work. They certainly couldn't go into their professions. They didn't have the language, or they didn't have the experience. They were reliant on the community to help them with getting housing. And when that ran out, it was a difficult thing for them to do housing on their own because it was expensive. And so I think they faced many of the same problems. Can you please explain the real difference between the immigrants to here and the immigrants to Israel?
That's a great question. I think, as you say, in many cases, the two communities are very similar. But I think what is different is not even at this point a destination. I mean, I think all the problems that you're describing in the United States are just tenfold more intense in Israel because it is such a small country. So, for example, when they came here, as you say, they came in very small numbers, right? Especially in the 70s or 80s. But in Israel, they became 20% of the population. The apartment shortage, for example, the recession, the economy, like it really affected the whole. It was much more intense. Israel is not such a, is not as big as the United States or Canada. But I feel like you're right. There are many differences. And if you read Bezmozgis, if you read Gary Steingart, you see, if you read Ulinich, Anna Ulinich, there's so many writers who are, describing the same experiences. But even if we think about the people who came in the 70s or 80s versus the 90s, it's different because even in Israel, it's different because when people came in the 70s, there were about 120,000 people who came, so it was much more easy to integrate them. They would send them to kibbutz to live in kibbutz for a year and a half, where they quickly learned the language. There were housing for them. When the people came in the 90s, there was no infrastructure to, as I said, it's like France and Germany that you need to integrate overnight in the United States, the size of the amount of France and Germany. So people just received money. They changed the way the immigration aliyah was happening from before you were given housing, infrastructure, and time to settle in. In the 90s, they were just given about $120 per month to live for 1 year, and that's it. And the state said, okay, now, yeah, integrate. But thank you for the question. It's an excellent one.
I'd like to follow up with another question.
Mhm.
The Israeli achievement in assimilating that number of immigrants is utterly remarkable. When the first Russian immigrants came to the United States, there probably were 1 to 2 million over a period of 10 to 20 years in a much larger population, even in the 1800s and late 19th century. What do you think can explain the pretty good response of the country or the government in integrating such a large number of people who didn't have language skills and etc.?
I think education, that's the main thing. In a way, integrating, you said Israel's achievement in integrating, but I think it's the people who migrate and who make an effort. This is the achievement. The achievement is people able to rebuild their life in a new country. Yes, the state gives them some infrastructure, but what is remarkable, how were they able to succeed in such a short amount of time? With that, I agree with you completely. And I think the education is the main thing. They came, most of them were minimum of university education. It's about 70% white-collar jobs. So many of them, as I said, the high-tech industry benefited so much from Soviet engineers who came. The doctors when doctors from the USSR came, they were really good doctors, but they could not work in medicine. It took each doctor from 5 to 7 years to actually to be able to get their license once again, to go through different itmachut, what is called, it's internship in hospitals and things like that. So it took a lot of toll, it took a lot of suffering, but yes, at the moment, after one generation, after 25, 30 years, we're talking about financially, culturally, socially, yes, the Russian-speaking Jews are very, very much integrated in the Israeli society, and their unemployment is on par with the local population. So yes, that's what I have to say.
We had a question in the chat of, so what was your experience of making Aliyah? Your family went to Israel first?
Yes, we went to Israel when I was 12. We left and I left to Canada when I was 19 and had to go to the army, if I'm being honest. So my experience are both good and bad. Yes, in the 90s, it was very difficult. There was quite a lot of bullying, especially for young kids. I had a friend in the class who, oh, sorry.
No, we're just gonna, please mute yourself if you're not.
I had fantastic friends, and I lived in Ra'anana, so it's a very wealthy town in the center of Israel. I know that it's much more difficult than the more peripheral towns like Ashdod and Rishon, where a lot of Russian-speaking immigrant friends settled. There was something that made me kind of ashamed of my Russianness. So it's something that many kids experience. And so you try to become Israeli as fast as possible. I remember like in 1 year, I was already speaking Hebrew with my sister, and I moved like 12, 14. So in the end, I felt very, very much Israeli, but I felt like there was really strong drive to erase your foreignness, erase your difference, and to become Israeli. And I think this is not the healthiest thing for a society. I think this is one of the actual differences in the United States, which is kind of, is a much more multicultural place, or at least that's how it seems to me when I'm comparing Canada and life in Israel. But more, I mean, I still have amazing friends. I'm still visit quite often. So
your parents are still there?
What?
Your parents are still there?
No, we immigrated.
All
of
of you, okay.
Mhm.
To what extent, how typical was that? What percentage of Russian immigrants ultimately migrated to countries outside of Israel?
How it went for the 1990s is that let's say in 88, about 50% of the immigrants from the Soviet Union went to the United States, 50% were going to Israel. In 89, once Gorbachev allowed out migration from the USSR, suddenly the United States and Canada closed the gates. So then 89, Russian-speaking Jews could not go to North America anymore. And so this rerouted almost 95% of immigrants to Israel because Israel wanted to absorb them, right? The demographic advantage of having a larger Jewish population is real. So they made a deal with the United States and Canada. So they would close the gates and reroute the whole migration to Israel. So so many people who moved to Israel actually wanted to move to North America more. And so it is quite typical, but it wasn't that difficult.
Do you have a statistic, or I don't know if you know what proportion left?
You mean who moved to Israel and then moved somewhere else?
Left, yeah. How many of that 1 million?
I think about 10%.
Could you talk a little bit about their impact on the political landscape in Israel?
Yes, of course. I mean, the one thing about Russian-speaking Jews that you probably know is that after living through the Soviet Union, they were quite allergic to left-wing anything. So anything that smacked of socialism, then probably it's not going to get accepted that well with the Russian-speaking Jewish community, especially the older generation who really went through, the horrors of socialism. So in that sense, or at least in Soviet socialism. So in this sense, when they came to Israel so far, the vote goes to something along the line of 2/3 after Rabin's assassination, the Russian-speaking community voted predominantly towards right-wing political parties. And as I said, 20% is significant, right? 20% of the country that votes a certain way. So the Russian-speaking community can break or make elections. This is something that is well-known. And so their effect was pushing Israel towards more nationalist political parties.
Okay. Any other questions?
Maybe about the movie, because the movie is so good and we haven't asked one question about that.
I was wondering how many people picked up on the red light that Victor, I don't, Israelis would know what that meant, that red light that he kept switching and not knowing what light it turned on. I mean, it was the hot water heater. I don't know how many non-Israelis picked up on that.
Yeah.
And at the end of the film, he still didn't understand that, which is hard to imagine.
Yeah, I feel like it was almost like Great Gatsby and the sun and the glasses that are watching everything and everyone. This was like such an existential misunderstanding. What is that light? What does it do? But yes, it's just what you press on when you want to shower, what you need to press on for half an hour before you need to shower. Did you like the film?
Yeah. Any comments or reactions to it people want to share?
Well, this is another question. I liked the film, but I wonder, I was surprised at the somehow at the red light district, and whether it's a lot staffed by immigrants and how popular it is and who the people are who use it.
I mean, the red light district, they didn't really show the actual, right? I mean, there's not necessarily a red light district in Israel the way it is in Amsterdam, but there's the area in the Bursa in Tel Aviv that is well known. And I think this is why the stereotype of the Russian woman equals Russian prostitute comes from, there was really unfortunate timing for the immigrants who came in the 1990s. It's coincided with the global prostitution trade from Eastern Europe. So at this point, many women from Eastern Europe would be, after the Soviet Union will fall apart and they didn't have many choices, the economic conditions were horrid. Many of them either through agency wanted to do that or were reduced to doing that because there were no other options. And many of them came to Israel. Many of them came to Israel by faking their Jewish papers, testifying that, they're Jewish and they just came to work in prostitution, or were even smuggled from the Arab countries. There's quite a lot of research about that by Larissa Shemenik, if you're interested. And what this coincided happened is because many of the sex workers were from the Russian former Soviet countries, suddenly all women with Russian accents would be perceived as such. And this is something that's really poisoned, the immigration experience for women, who just moved to a country and didn't know anything of life, and suddenly like, oh, you must be a sex worker. Like, how much do you charge for an hour? There's one artist who would go with the video camera and just walk down the street and would document how many offers she still receives in the 2010, like sexually explicit offers just for being blonde in Israel. So it's really a powerful and also like a big feminist issue at the moment in Israel. So thank you for this question. And of course, the film is not addressing that head on, but I think there's something, in the background, like in the unconscious of the film, that also wants to speak to that. I feel like the film wants to speak, or has a potential to start a conversation of so many important issues that talks about integration and the nature of this painful experience that was for many people. But thank you.
One thing that surprised me about the film was, given that there was such a huge Russian-speaking population in Israel, that there wasn't actually an industry catering to them, like catering to actual dubbing or foreign language, and it was all under the table. Was that kind of a conscious government thing to force people to assimilate? Like, why didn't the economy kind of catch up to this probable need?
This is such an excellent question. Let me even think about that. This is a great question. I think the economy, at least maybe in the year 1990, could not catch up that quickly. Maybe the immigrants were, as in the movie, they said, now it's not the time, right? When they came to see the friends and like, we'll do radio performances in Russian language of this and that. And he said, like, people don't have time for culture. People don't have time for literature. And people don't have money to spend on that too. Maybe there is something when the movie theater owner says, maybe I'll try to do something. Like, I think this is precisely what you're asking, right? Like, why didn't they do that? I think this is like a metaphor of this entrepreneurial spirit who thinks of, maybe we can monetize that.
Well, he tried showing Fellini and people really wanted to see Home Alone too.
Yeah, and this is something about, we are the intelligentsia, this is the something that, this like myth of the Russian-speaking Jews of like, yes, people of the book, intelligentsia, but in reality, after so many years of Soviet censorship and of, choosing what you can or cannot watch, I think the Home Alone person was much more to the point than Victor, who wanted to show Fellini. If he put from Home Alone, this would have been probably a full house, because that's something that's well known in like post-Soviet studies. Post-Soviet studies, like the suddenly the popular culture, this is what exploded in the post-Soviet Union, and all the highbrow cinemas, the books, they became like kind of devalued, and at least in the 1990s, maybe because life was too difficult, you know, to watch Fellini too. Maybe when you have like a really difficult day in front of you, you want to watch some Netflix trash or something.
Do we want to talk about gender? I mean, why are women more flexible than men? Why do women adapt better?
Yeah, maybe some of you want to tackle this question, and then I'll take a bite.
Go for it.
Okay, well, if no one wants, I'll say, well, what it was shown like quite a lot in research too, that in when we talk about immigration and gender, women integrate and adapt much faster than men. This is almost ubiquitous in all countries. And why is that? Because when you see when you move to a country, women are much more flexible. They are usually in the context of patriarchal family, you know, all families are patriarchal to an extent. At least in the case of Russian-speaking Jews in Israel, the women would be the first to take any jobs, you know, cleaning, McDonald's, anything that will get their family stay afloat, while men would be, you know, wallowing in tears and will try to redeem their, you know, educational background. So if, like, let's say if in the family we have 2 doctors, women will be working menial jobs, like in, I know, as I said, in the cleaning industry or something like that, while the man would be staying at home for 5 years and trying to regain their professional credentials. And it is very, very, very gendered. But why they integrate quicker? Because once you start with those jobs where you interact with local Israelis, your knowledge of the country becomes much faster, your linguistic skills raise. So in that sense, it's quite shown by research, and maybe you can see that from your own experiences or not. But I think this is, to me, the main gender. And Victor is a huge patriarch, right? Even in that scene with the movie cameraman's like, everyone's waiting for him. It's like, no, you do this, stop here, smile better. Like, oh my God, she's so unappealing at first, but also she's a tragic character.
Okay. Judy, you were on mute. Anything? Judy
I was just thinking that for this,
Go ahead.
just thinking that for men, alcohol was a trap. You know, it's easy to, once you're in it, and women didn't have the kind of drinking history and going out into the bars. And I think a lot of immigrants in the United States just ended up in the bars. And the wife.
Yeah.
Side of women, one factor, I spent a year in Israel. One factor is that the women in families would be more likely to get into, be required to get into things like shopping and taking the kids to school and ordinary experiences, which would get them more into the society and inevitably or very quickly into the language and the contacts they would make.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that sense, the double burden, right, to both be the person within the family and outside the family and go get, you know, employment was really tough on women. And this is why I think the cultural production that's coming from women from the USSR is so like ex-Soviet women in Israel is so powerful, because it talks about this double burden and this burning out from that life of having to do everything. And what you said, Judy, in terms of alcohol, yes, women perhaps don't drink as much because they don't have the space, the time, the luxury of having, you know, time for to have a drink after a difficult day because you have to prepare for the next difficult day. So yes, I think even that is, I think even alcoholism is patriarchal in a way.
Okay, Stan.
Yeah, so I'd like to comment on the couple that we have who are at the center of the film, because it looks at first like they're a pretty good couple and they get along and all of that. And as the movie goes on, you realize that there's underlying tensions between the two of them, which really emerges in the form of Raya being very unhappy, feeling very suppressed by Victor, and complains about it very volubly, and in fact leaves him at some point. And I would say that I don't know a lot about the literature on immigration, but immigration is a big stress, as has been stressed, and that brings out, whatever differences and tensions and conflicts exist in a couple or in a family. So perhaps our speaker can comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, you put it so well that I don't know what is there to comment, but yes, you're right. Immigration is like a pressure cooker, especially for a relationship where, all the issues that you're having in the relationship, this will be magnified 10 times in migration. So, and this is why, like, if we are looking sociologically on this community, the divorce rate was so much higher in the immigrant community than in non-immigrant community, precisely for those issues. But I feel like the movie is almost does not really focus on the stress, right? We do have the happy ending in the end. So in the end, they are reunited and seems to have addressed the issues. It's almost the immigration allows the couple the much needed opportunity to work through their issues in one way or another. Raya, perhaps to explore some kind of, well, for her, this job, she does not only take this job for the money, right? It is about showing Victor. When she said, oh, you can't sell perfume, like such dismissively, right? For her, like it hurt her a lot. And it feels like it hurt her because this is not the first time she's doing that. And what she's going there to do this job is to prove to herself that she's able, to take control over her life. And in the end, she found like an incredible community in there. She has a person who adopts her when she doesn't have a home. She found a friend. She realizes she found her, sexuality and agency when she sits on the bus and kind of laughs at the person and smiles at the person on the bus. We see her that she's really finding herself as a woman in the film through this job. And I think it gives her the boost of confidence to leave Victor and actually give him an ultimatum. You either change and you work for me, right? Like it's almost like the ending when she runs to find her with a gas mask. It's almost like a trope of romantic comedies when you see the man, like, running to the airport and stopping women from leaving. Like, yes, finally, after he does that, you're like, okay, maybe he finally appreciates me and she finally no longer neglects. So here the immigration is shown as a good thing for the couple.
Yes, thank you. Your remarks were very interesting. I mean, we really saw the development in Raya through a good part of the film and mostly at the end in the case of Victor. Yeah,
absolutely.
Very beginning, the toast. I mean, you see the power dynamics between them changes. Something my wife pointed out, that she asks him to make a dramatic toast to celebrate their first night in Israel, and he doesn't come up with anything.
Yes.
So he kind of disappointed her.
Yeah, I wonder though, what do you think would have, what do you think did she want? What do you think, like how did the toast should have gone so she would be happy? Like what was the expectation there?
I think it was a failure of leadership. At a key moment, he was supposed to commemorate their achievement as a couple, and he didn't rise to the occasion.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I feel like if it was the toast in the end of the film, she would not be voiceless asking for the man, to do the toast. She would give the toast herself.
Actually, good point there, voiceless. And here he is, a dubbing artist, and he had nothing to say.
Yeah, and this is of course the main metaphor, right? This is why golden voices, like why do you think they translated the golden voices? Is it both, like I see maybe both golden goats, right? The voices who are advanced age is one, and the second is like incredible, amazing voices. But the Hebrew kolot reka, the background voices, this is so much more, punching, slap in the face, like they're in the background, and finally they need to come to the fore. I think Raya saying something like that, I feel like I'm not even a main actor in my, fantasy movie. I'm in the sideline. I'm not even the supporting actress here, and she needs to come to the spotlight.
And she's a fabulous actress, which she proves in her phone conversations. She can be switched from a little girl to a
Sultry woman.
yeah. But and she also, there's that thing that he fell in love with her for her voice. It's like he didn't know her, the whole her, just her acting.
Yeah, this is what in rom-com is called meet cute moment, right? When the couple, but again, in the background, meet cute moment. Yeah, it's true. He's definitely in love with her. I think when she's like smashing the tapes, we see that there's love there, but she needs to, step it up.
All right. Well, this has been terrific. Thank you. Any final question or last question before we let Alex go back to a much deserved sleep?
Yeah, I was wondering how the movie was received in Israel by both the Russian-speaking community and the non-Russian-speaking community.
This is an excellent question. Overwhelmingly, the younger generation, the film director is in his 40s. So I'm talking about everyone who's 40 and younger. They overwhelmingly love the film. It was for them seeing their parents, see the struggle of their parents. And for them, they saw it as this hilarious comedy. Mostly they appreciate the satire, but also like the loving touch, right? I think when I'm watching that, I'm like, wow, aesthetically, it even reminds me Amelie. I wonder why. I think it's the cinematography, maybe the use of music in the film. Some kind of realism, but that's like magical realism. What the older generation, it was a bit more complex. Some people didn't want to open those wounds of the years of the 90s. They would say, like, I want to forget this period. This was a really difficult period for me and I can't look back. But others really loved that. Among the Hebrew speaking, but the movie actually opened up during, was set to open in cinemas during Corona as the coronavirus hit. So it was like a big disappointment for everyone. They were supposed to go international on a tour to different film festivals, and they were unable to do that. It was made in 2019, but it was set to tour the world in 2020. I mean, from the limited knowledge that I know, that the Hebrew speaking community also really liked that, but didn't attend the movie en masse just because it's filmed mostly in Russian. So a lot of the time that will alienate an Israeli, mostly an Israeli community. But whoever saw that, and I've talked to one of the actors in the film, Alexander Snegurochka, who would say that I've met also quite a lot of Israelis of the younger generation. I would ask them, like, what are you doing here? And they would say, this is historical for me. I have not, for me, this is a history not of the Russian speaking community, but of the land of Israel at large. So I wanted to see like what the insiders think about that. And I mean, it's such a terrific movie that I'm biased, but I think everyone would love that. So that is my quick question. But it won like 3 or 4 Ophir prizes, which is an Israeli version of the Israeli Oscars. So yes, it was very well received also, not by the people, but also by the industry, by the institutions.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you all for joining us. Internet applause.
Thank you so much. I actually really enjoyed the conversation. Your questions were excellent.